The entire hall froze as the Sheikh's voice rang out, speaking in Arabic no one could answer, except the janitor's 10-year-old daughter. She was nearly invisible in the bustling corridors of Al Murad Cultural Center, her small hands clutching a worn book as her mother, Samira, quietly scrubbed the marble floors. A clerk muttered, "Just the janitor's daughter. What could she possibly do here?" The delegation from Aden had arrived early, their spokesman speaking only in Hadrami, and panic rippled through the hall. Then 10-year-old Layla stepped forward, voice calm and precise. "I will carry your words." The murmurs stopped. Idris al-Faruqi, the sheikh, leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Where did you learn that? Or who taught you to hold such command?" Before we dive in, if you like this kind of stories of overcoming adversity and justice, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. In a hall filled with voices, one pair of eyes never looked up. The maid's daughter moved quietly among them, her presence so slight that most forgot she was even there. Yet every small step she took carried a weight of silence, a silence that hid more than it revealed. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Al Murad Cultural Center. The air smelled faintly of dust and polish, the kind that clings to marble floors cleaned by tired hands before dawn. The clatter of shoes and the low hum of conversation filled the vast hall. No one noticed the 10-year-old girl with blonde hair who sat on a low wooden chair near the service corridor, her feet not quite touching the ground. Her name was Layla, and today, like many days, she carried a book too big for her hands. The pages whispered as she turned them, though her eyes often strayed from the text to her mother. Her mother, Samira, worked as a janitor here. Her uniform, a pale gray blouse and navy skirt, worn thin at the elbows, told the story of long hours and little pay. She moved steadily, mop in hand, bending to the floor as men and women in fine suits passed by. None slowed to greet her. None offered more than a polite nod. Layla watched her mother's shoulders, the slight slump that grew heavier with each week. The family's debts weighed as much as the buckets she carried. Rent notices, unpaid bills, the quiet shame of asking for credit at the corner grocer. Samira bore all of it without complaint. Yet her daughter saw. Always, she saw. The people in the hall saw only what they wanted. To them, Samira was just the cleaner. And Layla, sitting there with her book, was only the maid's daughter. Too small, too unimportant to matter. But in her silence, Layla studied. She traced the curve of the Arabic letters on a passing banner, whispering them under her breath. Her lips formed the sounds of languages few here would recognize. Greek, Turkish, Hadrami, even faint strains of Latin. She had been taught in secret, not in classrooms, but in the quiet evenings when her grandfather's journals lay open on the kitchen table. A veteran, a linguist, a man who once carried honor like a banner, his memory now lived in her mind, word by word. No one here knew that. No one would guess. A voice boomed from the far end of the hall, calling attendants to prepare for the Sheikh's arrival. The sound echoed. Shoes clicked faster against the marble. Layla closed her book carefully and held it to her chest. Her mother glanced over, a small protective look, before dipping her mop again. The day had only begun. For now, the rhythm of work and routine kept them hidden in plain sight, as if nothing extraordinary could ever break through. The bell over the side door rang faintly as another worker entered. Voices softened into patterns of greetings, footsteps, and the occasional bark of an order from an overseer. Layla stayed where she was, book balanced on her lap, the world moving around her. She was a quiet shadow in a place that never looked twice at shadows. Samira wrung out the mop, her fingers red from the water, then moved closer to the reception desk. A clerk in a pressed white shirt brushed past her without pausing, his handkerchief brushing against her arm. He did not notice. He rarely did. Layla's gaze followed him. Then she looked back to her mother. Samira caught her daughter's eyes for only a heartbeat, just long enough to offer a tired, protective smile, the kind that said, "I see you, even if no one else does." That small glance was enough. Across the lobby, a group of young assistants gathered near a marble column. Their voices carried easily. "Too many guests today. We'll be running up and down all morning," one of them sighed, adjusting the sleeves of his beige jacket. Another laughed, a sharp sound. "At least we don't have her job." He nodded towards Samira, bending over the mop. "Can you imagine?" Layla's fingers tightened on her book, but she said nothing. She was used to these small dismissals. The words were not aimed at her directly, but they always landed close enough. The marble floor gleamed under Samira's hands, yet no one saw the shine. They only saw the uniform. At the far end, the entrance doors opened and a swirl of men in dark robes stepped in, their conversation layered and formal. They smelled faintly of incense and old wood, their words carrying the cadence of Arabic tinged with dialects from Yemen, Morocco, and Oman. Layla tilted her head, listening. The sound stirred something familiar, like a half-remembered melody. Her lips moved silently, shaping the words she heard, matching them in rhythm and meaning. She knew these dialects. Not from school, not from teachers, but from the journals of her grandfather, his notes pressed into her memory like markings on stone. But no one was watching her. Not yet. Samira glanced again toward her daughter. She moved her bucket closer, as though to draw a protective circle around the little chair where Layla sat. The clock struck the quarter hour. A hush swept the room for a moment, brief but noticeable. The Sheikh was near. The crowd straightened coats and adjusted collars. The day's order, so far untouched, was about to shift. And in the shifting, a small disturbance was about to surface. One that would place the maid's daughter where no one expected her to stand. The grand doors opened wider. A group of visitors filed in, carrying leather satchels and polished folders. Their shoes tapped against marble like small hammers. At the back of the group, an elderly man paused, frowning at a sign posted on the wall. It was written in Arabic, but not the Arabic he knew. The script was Hadrami, old and specific, drawn from the southern coasts of Yemen. The others walked ahead, unaware. He stayed rooted in confusion, whispering the words to himself. Layla's eyes lifted from her book. She watched his lips move, saw his puzzled brow. Her breath caught. Slowly, she slid from her chair, clutching the book to her chest with one hand, and stepped toward him. The hall was noisy, yet her small voice carried clearly when she spoke. "Sir, it says the meeting for regional archives has been moved upstairs. The second hall on the left." The man blinked, startled. He looked down. Only then did he notice her, small, blonde-haired, dressed in a plain blue cotton dress that brushed her knees. Her sandals looked borrowed, slightly too large for her feet. "You can read this?" he asked, his voice sharper than intended. Layla nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, sir. It is Hadrami dialect." Her tone was soft, factual, without pride. She spoke the words again in their original dialect, her tongue shaping them with an ease that startled him further. The man stood still, studying her face. "And how did you learn this?" Layla's fingers tightened against the spine of her book. For a moment, she thought of her grandfather, of nights lit by a single lamp, his voice steady as he traced characters on paper, explaining sounds older than both of them. She thought of her mother, sitting silently nearby, mending a shirt or peeling potatoes, listening but never interrupting. "I was taught," Layla said simply. Behind them, Samira had stopped mopping. Her shoulders stiffened, and her eyes narrowed, watching carefully. She knew this moment. She had feared it, and yet she had hoped for it. The elderly man glanced toward the others in his group. They had stopped now, curious. Whispers rippled. "A child? Speaking Hadrami? Strange," one murmured. "She is just the cleaner's daughter." Layla heard it, but did not flinch. Her eyes remained on the man before her, waiting quietly. He gave a small nod, adjusting his robe. "Thank you, little one." His voice softened, almost respectful now. "Without you, I would have lost myself in these halls." Layla stepped back toward her chair, the weight of many new eyes following her. The silence around her was different now, less invisible, more questioning. And in that silence, another figure noticed. Not just noticed, but began to watch. High above, on the second-floor balcony, Sheikh Idris al-Faruqi stood with his advisors. He was a tall man in his late 60s, his beard silvered at the chin, his robe of deep indigo edged with gold. He leaned on a carved cane, though he walked without needing it, a habit inherited from years of ceremony rather than frailty. He had been listening. He had seen the child speak to the lost visitor. And though the Sheikh's face rarely revealed thought, his eyes, sharp, dark, steady, narrowed slightly. A pause, that was all. But a pause noticed by those near him. "Something wrong, Your Excellency?" Maid asked in a low voice. Idris did not answer at first. His gaze lingered on the girl. Blonde hair, plain dress, small shoulders held steady, unlike most children. He had seen countless crowds, countless supplicants. But the composure of this one stirred something in him, a question without name. "No," he said finally. His voice was calm. Not wrong. Interesting. Below, Samira resumed her work, dipping the mop into the bucket, pressing harder than needed. The water splashed against her wrists. She felt the weight of eyes above, though she dared not look up. Her heart tightened. Had her daughter drawn too much attention? Attention could be blessing, or it could be danger. Layla, unaware of the shift above, had returned to her chair. She opened her book again, her lips moving in silent rhythm, whispering words from yet another tongue. To her, the sounds were a comfort, anchors to the memory of her grandfather's voice. But the Sheikh kept watching. He noticed how she held the book, careful, almost reverent, unlike most children who turn pages too quickly. He noticed how she sat, not slouched, but upright, shoulders aligned, as though discipline were woven into her bones. These were not small details. They spoke of training, of lineage, of something hidden. Around him, his advisors continued their chatter about documents, signatures, and visiting scholars. But Idris heard none of it. His cane tapped once against the marble railing, a soft signal. One of his men stepped closer. "Keep an eye on the child," Idris said quietly. The man bowed slightly. And as the Sheikh's attention turned toward her, the path of this ordinary day began to bend, ever so slightly, toward the unexpected. The hall grew noisier as the visitors settled into their meetings. Papers shuffled. Footsteps echoed against the marble. Yet amid the busyness, one figure detached from the flow. He was a man in his 40s, dressed in a cream-colored thobe and dark vest. His name was Omar Karim, a mid-level advisor to Sheikh Idris. He was known for his sharp eyes, for the way he could weigh a person without speaking more than a sentence. Omar walked with deliberate calm, not rushing, not wandering. His path curved toward the service corridor where Layla sat with her book. Samira noticed first. She straightened, wringing out her mop until her knuckles whitened. Her eyes flicked to her daughter, then back to the approaching man. She stayed silent, but every part of her was alert. Omar stopped near the chair. He looked down at Layla, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing. He only glanced at the book in her lap, at the small hands holding it open with surprising steadiness. "What are you reading?" His voice was even, neither harsh nor soft. Layla looked up. Her eyes were clear. "Poems," she answered. Translated from Greek. Omar's brow moved, just a fraction. He studied her face for signs of jest, of childish fantasy. But her calm did not waver. "You understood the sign earlier?" he asked. Layla nodded once. "Yes. How many languages do you know?" Her answer came without hesitation, but without pride. 8. The word hung in the air, almost heavy. Omar tilted his head, studying her longer. He expected a child's fidgeting, perhaps nervous laughter. Instead, she held her silence, her book still open, her small shoulders square. Behind them, Samira shifted her weight. She longed to step forward, to shield her daughter with words, but she stopped herself. Layla's composure asked for space, not interruption. Omar's gaze softened, though only slightly. "Who taught you?" Layla hesitated. The memory of her grandfather's journals flickered in her mind. The ink stains, the steady hand guiding hers. "My grandfather," she said at last. "And my mother." Omar glanced at Samira then, acknowledging her for the first time. She bowed her head slightly, not speaking. Silence stretched between them. Then Omar gave a small nod. "Very well." He stepped back. His tone shifted, almost casual. "Would you be willing to come upstairs for a moment? The Sheikh may want a word." Samira's heart stilled. Layla closed her book gently, as though sealing something sacred. She looked to her mother. Samira's lips parted, but she did not speak. Only a faint nod escaped her. Layla rose from her chair. And with that small, quiet movement, the maid's daughter stepped toward a place she was never meant to stand. The staircase curved like a ribbon of stone, leading to the second floor where light poured in through tall windows. Layla walked beside Omar, her small sandals tapping softly on each step. She carried no bag, no pen, only her worn book pressed gently against her chest. Behind her, Samira followed. Her gray blouse clung with the dampness of work, her skirt brushing the steps. She did not walk with the confidence of those above. She walked with quiet caution, aware that each step was a borrowed permission. The air changed as they ascended. Downstairs, the scents were of dust, polish, and sweat. Here, the fragrance of cardamom coffee drifted in the air. The walls were lined with carved wood panels, and soft carpets muffled the sound of movement. Servants moved silently in white gloves, carrying trays of glass cups, their eyes fixed on their duties. Layla noticed everything. The shift in air, the stillness of the guards at each corner, the way voices here spoke lower, as though words themselves weighed more in this space. A double door opened, and they stepped into the Sheikh's reception hall. It was spacious yet quiet, lined with shelves of books, maps rolled in brass holders, and calligraphy framed in dark wood. A long table stood at the center, polished until it shone. Around it sat men of stature, scholars, clerks, advisors, all pausing as the child entered. Their expressions shifted in unison, confusion, curiosity, and skepticism mingled together. Samira's steps slowed, her heart pounding. She moved closer to her daughter, though she knew she would not be the focus here. Her hand twitched as though to rest on Layla's shoulder, but she stopped herself. At the head of the room stood Sheikh Idris. His indigo robe gleamed softly under the light. He rested both hands on his cane, his eyes never leaving the girl. "This is her." His voice was low but carried across the hall. "Yes, Your Excellency," Omar replied. Layla bowed her head politely. "Good afternoon, Sheikh." Her voice was soft, but it traveled cleanly, with the clarity of one used to respect in the words, if not the life around her. A ripple moved through the room. Some murmured. Others scoffed quietly. Idris raised a hand, silencing them. His gaze lingered on her longer than on anyone else present. He noticed her composure, the stillness rare in children. Samira lowered her eyes, clutching the handle of her cleaning bucket still in her hand. Here, she was tolerated, not welcomed. But her daughter had just crossed an invisible threshold. And in that solemn room, the first questions of her past would begin to surface. The chairs creaked softly as the men leaned forward. The Sheikh gestured for Layla to sit at the end of the long polished table. The seat dwarfed her small frame, but she did not squirm or fidget. She set her book gently on the table, her hands folded neatly on top. Samira stood just behind her, bucket placed discreetly at the wall. She kept her head slightly bowed, though her eyes never left her child. Idris's voice carried no sharpness, only calm weight. "They tell me you read Hadrami." "Yes, Sheikh." "And Greek." Layla nodded. "And others." Murmurs rustled across the table like wind across dry leaves. One scholar leaned closer, whispering, "Impossible at her age." Another shook his head. "A trick, perhaps." Idris silenced them with a glance. Then his eyes returned to the child. "Tell me, how?" Layla hesitated, not from fear, but from choosing the simplest words. "My grandfather was a soldier and a teacher. He traveled many lands. He wrote what he saw, what he heard. He left journals." Her small fingers brushed the edge of her book, as though it, too, carried his presence. "He showed me letters when I was little. My mother read to me when he no longer could." Samira's throat tightened. She had not expected to be named in this grand hall. For a second, her eyes met Idris's. She gave the smallest nod, confirming what her daughter had said. The Sheikh's brow moved slightly. "Your grandfather's name?" Layla lifted her chin a little. "Colonel Marwan al-Haddad." The name stirred the room. A few older men exchanged glances, whispers laced with recognition. Marwan, the veteran who once trained interpreters for border missions, the man who spoke with diplomats as easily as with soldiers. A man who vanished from public record after war's end, buried in silence and death. Idris leaned heavier on his cane. His eyes softened, but only for a fleeting moment. "I knew of him." Layla bowed her head once in respect. She did not smile, did not glow with pride. She carried the name like a steady weight, not a banner. Samira's hand brushed the fabric of her skirt. She remembered nights when Marwan coughed blood into a rag, but still insisted on reciting foreign verses to his granddaughter. She remembered selling her jewelry to buy ink and paper when money was gone. She remembered, but she stayed silent. Around the table, skepticism remained. Yet curiosity had now taken root. And with the seed of her lineage planted, the deeper layers of sacrifice and persistence would begin to unfold. The silence in the Sheikh's chamber stretched. The name Marwan al-Haddad had pressed into the air like a seal on wax, difficult to ignore, impossible to erase. Idris leaned slightly forward, the gold of his robe catching the light. "Your grandfather taught you, but he passed when you were young, did he not?" Layla's voice was steady, though softer now. "Yes, I was 6. He left his books, his journals. My mother kept them safe." All eyes shifted briefly to Samira. She stood behind her daughter, her mop handle resting against the wall, her gray blouse clinging to her shoulders with faint stains of water. She did not speak, but her face held the truth. Layla went on. After he was gone, there was no money for school. My mother worked. She cleaned. She carried. I read by myself. I copied his notes until the pages tore. The child's words were not a performance. They carried no complaint. They were simple facts, spoken without self-pity, the way soldiers report a march. One of the advisors scoffed under his breath. Children read stories, not dialects of the desert. Layla turned her head slightly toward him. Her small chin lifted, not defiant but precise. Children read what is given to them. My mother gave me pages of men long dead. I read until I understood. The scoff died. The man looked away. Samira closed her eyes for a moment. She remembered the nights her daughter spoke in whispers while she scrubbed uniforms for wealthy neighbors, too poor to pay school fees. She remembered the small hand tugging at her sleeve, asking what a strange mark meant in her grandfather's diary. She remembered answering with honesty, even when she herself did not know. Sacrifice was stitched into every moment of those years. Samira bore the weight of debt so her daughter could hold the weight of words. Layla rested her hand gently on her book. I studied because he believed language can keep memories alive. If words are lost, people are lost. Idris's eyes flickered, something within them stirred, a shadow of respect. He leaned back slowly, tapping the cane against the floor. Your grandfather was right. The room shifted again, quiet but undeniable. Doubt did not vanish, but it weakened. The maid's daughter had not only answered questions, she had carried her lineage into the room, like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. Samira exhaled softly, her shoulders loosening. But inside, her heart pressed tighter. Recognition brought light. Light also brought danger. And in that fragile balance, the first chance for her daughter to prove herself in action was about to come. The chamber doors opened suddenly. A young clerk hurried in, papers clutched tightly in his hands. His forehead shone with sweat as he bowed before the Sheikh. Your Excellency, he said quickly, the delegation from Aden has arrived early. They are waiting in the East Conference Room. But, he hesitated, glancing at the papers. Their spokesman speaks only in Hadrami. We have no one ready. The words stirred unease. Murmurs spread around the table. One advisor muttered, the translator was scheduled for tomorrow. Another shook his head. This will cause insult. A delegation kept waiting is a wound to honor. Idris tapped his cane once, the sharp sound echoing. The room stilled. His eyes moved back to Layla. The pause lasted only a breath, yet it felt longer. Bring the girl, he said simply. Gasps whispered at the edges of the hall. A child? To represent them? Impossible. Dangerous. Absurd. Samira's breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer to her daughter, placing a protective hand on the back of the chair. She is only a child, she murmured, unable to hide her fear. But Idris did not move his gaze. And yet she understands what no one else here does. His tone was final, a stone placed firmly on the ground. Layla rose slowly. She held her book against her chest, not as a shield, but as a reminder of where her strength came from. Her small steps made no sound on the carpet. Samira leaned down, her lips close to her daughter's ear. Be careful, Habibti. Her voice trembled. Speak slowly. Do not let them trap you with pride. Layla gave the faintest nod. She did not smile, did not reassure. She simply met her mother's eyes for a moment, as though to say, I will carry this well. Omar stepped forward to guide her toward the door. His stride was long, hers short, yet she walked evenly beside him. The weight of every gaze pressed upon her, but her shoulders did not fold. The corridor beyond was cool and shadowed. Layla's sandals tapped again, faint echoes on the stone. At the end of the hall, the East Conference Room waited. Inside, men of rank and expectation would be ready, impatient for someone to speak their tongue. Samira followed as far as the threshold, then stopped. She pressed her damp hands together, whispering a prayer under her breath. And in the hush that followed, the girl stepped forward alone, toward her first proof in action. The East Conference Room was smaller than the Grand Chamber, but carried greater tension. Heavy drapes muted the light, and the air was thick with the faint scent of oud and coffee. Around a low-polished table sat the delegation from Aden, for men in long white robes, their headscarves marked with the red patterns of their homeland. Their voices overlapped, low and sharp, frustration already simmering. They stopped when Layla entered. Omar gestured quietly for her to step forward. This is the one, he said, though he offered no explanation. The eldest delegate narrowed his eyes. A child. His Hadrami tongue cut through the air like a blade. Layla lowered her head politely, then raised it again with calm. And in their dialect, pure and clear, she answered, "Yes, I am young. But I can carry your words safely across this table." The men leaned back, surprise flashing in their eyes. One covered his mouth with his hand as if to hide a smile of disbelief. Another frowned deeply. The eldest folded his arms. "So you claim." Layla did not argue. She simply gestured to the papers he carried. "Please, begin." The man spoke, a long string of words, layered with idioms and local sayings rarely heard outside the southern coast. His tone was deliberate, meant to trip, to test. Layla listened without blinking. Her lips moved faintly, shaping the rhythm of his speech. When he finished, she turned toward Omar and the attending clerks. In flawless modern standard Arabic, she translated every phrase with precision, capturing not only meaning but cadence. The room shifted. One of the younger delegates whispered to another, disbelief painted across his face. The eldest tapped the table once with his finger, the gesture of a man who had just tested iron and found it solid. Silence followed, heavy yet respectful. Omar's eyes moved slowly to the Sheikh's men at the back of the room. Their expressions, once doubtful, had softened into reluctant acknowledgement. Layla stood quietly, her hands folded in front of her. She did not bow. She did not smile. She simply waited, calm and unshaken. Outside the doorway, unseen but listening, Samira pressed her hands together tighter. Tears pricked her eyes, but she held them back. Pride warmed her chest, but fear still hovered. Fear of what this recognition might invite. The eldest delegate finally nodded. "We accept her words. She carries them well." And with that, the balance in the room shifted. Whispers began to spread beyond those walls, carried not by the girl, but by the men who had just witnessed her. Word spread quickly, though quietly, like a soft wind through the corridors of Al Murad Cultural Center. The delegates returned to their meetings, speaking in hushed tones, recounting the astonishing fluency of the maid's daughter. Some repeated her exact phrases, marveling at the precision. Others questioned what they had seen, unwilling to admit a child could accomplish such a feat. Back in the main hall, the murmurs had begun. Clerks and scholars who had previously ignored Samira and her daughter now exchanged curious glances. "Did you see her?" One whispered. "The child who translated for Aiden? Remarkable." Another shook his head slowly. "I wouldn't have believed it, had I not heard the words myself." Layla sat quietly in her chair, back in the service corridor, book once again resting in her lap. She did not boast. She did not lean forward to see the effect. But she felt the change in the air. Eyes lingered longer than they had before. Conversations dipped lower when she passed. Samira's hand brushed the edge of the mop bucket. Her pulse thrummed in her throat. She heard fragments of gossip from passing clerks. Admiration, yes, but also thinly veiled resentment. One of the junior assistants muttered under his breath, "A child? And a janitor's daughter." The word stung, but Samira's gaze softened on her daughter. Let them talk, she thought. Let her walk the path she earned. Outside, in the hallways where servants and custodians moved, news spread like sparks across dry wood. The ones who had once dismissed the pair began to glance with new awareness. Doors opened slightly longer when Layla passed. Chairs were shifted without comment to give her space at the edge of gatherings. Respect, subtle and quiet, began to appear in gestures rather than words. Omar Karim returned briefly to check on her. He nodded once, silently approving. "Well done," he murmured. His voice carried no fanfare, only acknowledgement. Layla looked up briefly at her mother. Samira's eyes were bright, yet restrained, pride hidden behind habitual caution. No words were needed. Each knew the other had survived the scrutiny of strangers today, had walked through disbelief with composure. Even the Sheikh's presence, distant and formal, felt heavier in her awareness. Idris had not yet spoken to her directly again, but she sensed that he watched, recording each moment, each subtle gesture. In this quiet recognition, Layla understood something that even Samira did not say aloud. Respect could be reclaimed without declaration. It arrived silently, in the shift of posture, the tone of whispered conversations, the reluctant admiration of skeptics. And as the afternoon sun tilted through the tall windows, painting the marble with long golden lines, the first seeds of acknowledgement had taken root. Soon, The first direct recognition from the highest authority would follow, one that would move them beyond whispers into the light of opportunity. Sheikh Idris al-Faruqi sat at the head of the long table, his indigo robe glowing softly in the late afternoon light. His eyes were steady, sharp, and focused entirely on the small figure before him. Layla, standing at the edge of the table, held her book close. Her posture was perfect, not defiant, not humble, simply composed. Idris's voice was calm, carrying the weight of authority and observation. "Layla," he said, using her name for the first time in the room. "I have watched your work today." Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. "You have served others who could not guide themselves," he continued. "And yet you understood, you interpreted, you carried meaning where others failed. You have a rare gift, and it deserves more than whispers." The room was still. Every advisor, every clerk, every attendant felt the gravity of the statement. Layla's gaze flicked briefly to her mother. Samira's hands rested lightly on her mop, but her fingers twitched imperceptibly, gripping nothing, holding her place as guardian and witness. Pride shone quietly in her eyes. Idris leaned forward on his cane. "I will offer you guidance, access to lessons, and mentorship, not as a favor, but as recognition of your ability." Layla's fingers tightened slightly around her book. She did not speak immediately. The weight of decision pressed upon her, the chance to step beyond her world, the awareness that her life could change in subtle yet profound ways. Samira cleared her throat softly. "Your Excellency," she said carefully, "how can I be sure she will not be exploited? That she will not simply become a token?" The Sheikh's eyes softened toward her, acknowledging her caution. "She will not. The opportunity is hers to earn and shape. You will remain close. Protection is yours, but the path is hers." Layla lowered her head briefly, the smallest nod confirming both gratitude and comprehension. She was not seeking mercy, nor favor, only a place where her skill could be recognized and cultivated. Omar Karim stepped back, his expression unreadable but respectful. Around them, murmurs remained muted. Everyone present felt the shift. The maid's daughter had moved beyond invisibility. Samira inhaled quietly, releasing tension she had carried for years. For the first time, she felt the contours of a future she could not have imagined. Idris's voice cut softly through the silence again. "The lessons will begin tomorrow. Your mother may accompany you, and you will continue to serve those who need your skills most. But now, your gift is acknowledged. Use it well." Layla straightened. She did not smile. She did not bow extravagantly. She simply stood there, composed, aware that her quiet strength had been recognized at last. And with the Sheikh's words, the doors to a world previously forbidden began to open. The next morning, sunlight spilled over the polished floors of the upper chamber. Layla walked beside her mother, Samira, whose simple gray blouse now seemed a quiet contrast to the rich tapestries and dark wooden panels around them. Omar Karim led the way, opening a heavy door that revealed a room where adults usually conducted matters of state. Scholars, clerks, and advisors were already seated. Their papers, pens, and maps lay arranged with meticulous order. When their eyes settled on the child entering, murmurs rippled across the room. Layla held her book close, her sandals making soft, even taps against the marble. Her posture was upright, her head steady. She did not run or fidget. She did not try to charm anyone. She merely stepped into a space she had never been allowed to occupy and carried herself as if she belonged. Samira followed quietly behind, aware of every gaze, every subtle gesture. She adjusted the hem of her skirt, but did not call attention to herself. She was here only to guard, not to lead. Idris's voice rose above the quiet murmurs. "Layla, please, sit here." He motioned to the end of the table. The seat was larger than she had imagined, the surface polished to a mirror sheen. Layla settled into the chair carefully. Her small feet barely touched the floor, but she did not fidget. Around the table, men and women exchanged glances, some skeptical, some astonished. A few straightened their backs, as if the child's presence demanded a reevaluation of rank and ability. "Today," Idris continued, "you will observe, and you may contribute when you see fit. Speak only when necessary." Layla nodded. Her hands rested atop her book, folded neatly. She observed quietly, taking in the papers, maps, and whispered exchanges of strategy. She noted the subtle gestures, how one advisor adjusted his notes before speaking, how another softened a tone when addressing a superior. Samira watched her daughter closely. Pride and worry mingled in her chest. She realized that this child, once invisible in the corridors, now commanded attention without demanding it. A scholar whispered to another, "She reads the room as easily as she reads words." Layla caught nothing of the comment. Her eyes remained on the flow of conversation, her mind quietly tracing meanings, patterns, and connections others had missed. Omar stood at the edge of the room, eyes flicking to Idris, then back to Layla. The Sheikh had chosen wisely. This child did not stumble under attention. She absorbed it. She held it. And when the first real challenge arrived, all eyes would turn toward her, and she would not falter. A message from the northern delegation had been misinterpreted, a small error that could snowball into insult. Documents were incomplete, agreements misaligned. The advisors whispered urgently, their brows furrowed with tension. Idris tapped his cane lightly against the polished table, the single sound demanding attention. "Layla," he said, his voice calm but firm, "the matter requires clarity, and quickly. Can you assist?" Layla rose, the book held tightly against her chest. Her small frame moved deliberately toward the stack of papers. Around her, the adults shifted uncomfortably, unsure how much authority to grant a child. Some leaned back, arms crossed, waiting to see her falter. Samira stood behind, hands clasped lightly, heart tight. She would not intervene unless absolutely necessary. This was her daughter's moment, one she had earned through years of quiet preparation and discipline. The Northern delegation's letter was full of idioms and subtle cultural references, layered in dialects that shifted mid-sentence. Even the most experienced interpreters would hesitate, needing minutes to parse. Layla studied the text, lips moving faintly as she traced each word, each phrase. Her fingers skimmed over annotations she had made in the margins days before, lines learned by memory. Then, without hesitation, she spoke. Her voice was calm, precise, carrying the meaning of the letter to the assembled council and translating it in proper sequence. Each term, each subtlety, was captured. She anticipated questions before they arose, clarifying cultural references and aligning expectations. Whispers circled around the table. Advisors straightened. Delegates exchanged quick glances, some with relief, others with astonishment. The tension that had thickened the room seemed to dissolve as she continued, unshaken. Omar Karim's gaze softened. Idris's eyes, fixed on her the entire time, revealed the faintest trace of a smile, a rare acknowledgement from the Sheikh. Even the skeptical delegates began nodding in quiet respect. Samira's hands pressed lightly against her chest. She exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, as relief and pride coursed through her. She had witnessed her daughter navigate what adults had feared. Layla concluded, folding her hands over the book. She did not linger, did not seek applause. The room absorbed the impact of her competence naturally. The clarity she brought was undeniable. Idris rose slightly, cane tapping once. "The matter is resolved. Thanks to her precision, misunderstanding has been avoided." "Well done, Layla." For a fleeting moment, the room was still, not with tension, but with recognition. And with that recognition came something tangible, a symbol of respect and reward that would change the course of both their lives. Sheikh Idris stood at the head of the polished table, his indigo robe catching the afternoon light. Advisors and delegates gathered around, their murmurs subdued, eyes flicking toward the small girl at the edge of the room. Layla stood quietly beside her mother, book pressed gently to her chest. Samira's hands were folded, knuckles white with tension, though her posture remained straight. She had scrubbed floors, carried buckets, and shouldered debt for years, and now she watched her daughter receive what neither had dared imagine. Idris spoke clearly, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Layla, your precision, discipline, and quiet judgment have resolved issues that even seasoned interpreters could not. Today, I formally acknowledge your gift." He gestured to a sealed envelope on the table. "This scholarship ensures your education will be supported. Your talent will have room to grow." Layla's small fingers closed over the envelope, feeling its weight, not of paper, but of possibility. She did not speak. She did not leap or smile. She only nodded once, a single movement of acknowledgement and gratitude. Then Idris turned to Samira, and to the mother who nurtured and protected this talent, who sacrificed silently so that another might flourish. "You are recognized as well. Your position here is secured, with respect and fair remuneration. The family will also receive an honorarium for their contributions, sufficient to settle debts and improve your home immediately." The room was hushed. Clerks and scholars stared, some incredulous, some nodding with restrained approval. The gesture was not charity. It was respect earned through skill, patience, and quiet endurance. Samira's throat tightened. She blinked rapidly, suppressing tears. No one in the room needed to notice the pride in her eyes, yet a few did. They saw the janitor's uniform, gray and plain, standing beside the indigo robe of the Sheikh, and understood the bridge that had been crossed. Layla slid her hands around the envelope, then let them fall lightly to her side. She did not speak of pride or victory. She simply stood tall, carrying her accomplishment with calm dignity. The Sheikh gestured to Omar Karim. Ensure they have what they need to begin this next stage. And let them know, always, that their worth is inherent, not granted. Samira exhaled, a slow, relieved breath she had never allowed herself before. She and her daughter exchanged a glance. No words, only recognition of the moment. Outside the hall, whispers began again. But this time, they were not doubts or disbelief. They were acknowledgement, admiration, and respect. And in the quiet aftermath of public recognition, private moments of gratitude began to flow from those inspired by what had been achieved. Layla walked beside her mother, their steps quiet on the polished floor. The envelope and symbolic check rested lightly in her hands, yet their weight felt more profound than anything she had carried before. People passed by, some pausing briefly. A scholar, previously skeptical, approached and lowered his voice. Your translation today, it was impeccable. Thank you for showing us how precise language can resolve conflict. Layla inclined her head, small and measured. She offered no grand words of reply. Her acknowledgement was the nod itself, simple and dignified. Another voice came from behind a partition. One of the younger clerks had overheard her work and whispered thanks to Samira. Without her, we would have faltered. Please thank her for me. Samira's lips twitched into a faint smile. She touched her daughter's shoulder lightly, fingers brushing the cotton of her dress. She already knows, Samira said softly, though there was no need. Her eyes, glistening, reflected the pride she dared not speak aloud. Even Omar Karim lingered nearby, his presence quiet yet reassuring. He offered no applause, only a brief, approving glance, the kind that carries weight without sound. Layla moved down the corridor, stopping to hand a small note she had prepared to a clerk. In neat, careful handwriting, it conveyed gratitude for patience, understanding, and the chance to demonstrate her skill. She folded the note, letting it rest gently on his desk. The gesture was subtle, but the clerk's eyes widened, and a soft smile curved his lips. Samira followed close behind. She felt the warmth of acknowledgement not just for her daughter, but for herself. Years of unnoticed work, the heavy nights, the moments when she carried both child and debt, they were recognized indirectly, quietly, in gestures and gratitude she had never anticipated. Layla paused near a small fountain in the center of the hall, watching the water ripple with a calm rhythm. She tucked a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear, then looked at her mother. Samira met her gaze, understanding the silent exchange. The journey had begun, and they had stepped together into something new. For the first time, neither of them felt invisible. They were seen, acknowledged, not as curiosities, not as tokens, but as individuals whose discipline, courage, and quiet intelligence had earned respect. And in that gentle, almost private reverence, they shared a small, wordless acknowledgement of the change that had begun in their lives. Yet, even with admiration, opposition would not be far behind. The next challenge would test not just skill, but the resolve to claim rightful recognition. Idris had stepped away briefly, leaving the room under the supervision of a visiting dignitary, Minister Rashid al-Qadri, a man in his 50s, known for scrutinizing competence with a sharp, unyielding eye. His cream-colored robe and silver-embroidered sash made him appear more imposing than he already was. Rashid's gaze fell immediately on Layla, seated at the end of the long table, small and composed, book in lap. He leaned forward slightly, hands clasped, and studied her as one might a puzzle, trying to detect flaws where none existed. "You are the girl who translated for the Aden delegation?" he asked, his voice low but cutting. Layla lifted her head calmly. "Yes, sir." He arched a brow. A child, and the daughter of a janitor, leading discussions meant for trained interpreters. Are we to trust that your understanding is accurate? That your comprehension is not coincidental? Samira tensed beside her daughter. She pressed her hands together, suppressing the instinct to speak. She had trained herself to let Layla carry these moments alone. Layla's voice was measured, steady. Every word I translated has been verified by the delegation. Their acknowledgement was immediate. Accuracy is not determined by age or station, only by understanding. Rashid's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. Understanding alone does not suffice. You have yet to face the full pressure of interpretation under negotiation. I am ready, Layla replied simply. Her small hands rested lightly on her book, fingers still and precise. There was no bravado in her stance, only clarity. Samira's lips pressed together tightly. She exhaled slowly, holding back pride, fear, and hope all at once. This was the moment she had feared and prepared for, the confrontation with those who would not yield respect without proof. Rashid studied her for another long beat. Then, in a deliberate tone, he continued, "If what you claim is true, you will demonstrate it. There is a message from the Eastern Trade Council, complex and layered. Translate it. Any error, and we will see the limitations of your knowledge." Layla inclined her head, opening her book to a blank page she had prepared for notes. Her calmness anchored the room, even as whispers rose around the edges. Samira's heart thrummed. She clenched her hands lightly, gripping nothing, letting her daughter step forward alone. Layla took a deep breath, her mind tracing languages and idioms, her fingers ready to note subtleties. This was no longer practice or observation. This was the moment of undeniable proof. And when she spoke, every doubter would face a truth they could not ignore. The Eastern Trade Council's message lay on the table, sealed and dense with layered dialects and cultural references. Advisors hovered, uncertain if a child could navigate such complexity. Minister Rashid Al-Qadri watched closely, his eyes sharp, anticipating hesitation or error. Layla opened her book, glancing at the margins where she had practiced similar translations. She did not speak at once. Instead, her lips moved faintly, tracing the rhythms of the text, each syllable echoing the cadence of those languages she had learned from her grandfather's journals and her mother's careful guidance. Rashid's gaze remained fixed, his posture rigid. The room's tension thickened. Even the Sheikh's aides leaned forward slightly, sensing the critical moment. Samira stood behind her daughter, silently urging calm, heart hammering in quiet rhythm. Layla began. Her voice was small but clear, precise in tone, translating every idiom, every subtle phrase into modern standard Arabic. She anticipated ambiguities, clarified meanings without hesitation, and conveyed nuances that even trained interpreters might have missed. The council members, initially skeptical, leaned closer. Eyes widened, heads tilted. The complexity of the document had been fully preserved and communicated flawlessly. One delegate whispered to another, almost incredulous, "A child, and yet, perfect." Rashid's eyes narrowed, then softened. He frowned slightly, studying her, measuring the impossibility against the reality. Layla's translation continued, smooth, confident, and exact. Even the pauses of speech were intentional, giving the text its proper weight and cadence. Samira's hands unclenched slightly, relief warming her chest, though she remained still. She had taught her daughter resilience. Yes, but this was the moment where the world would have to acknowledge it. Finally, Layla concluded. She folded her hands neatly over the book, her expression calm and unreadable. She did not seek applause. She did not smile. She simply waited. A silence stretched across the room, heavy with astonishment. Then, Rashid exhaled slowly, a hint of a nod forming. "It appears. I was wrong," he admitted quietly. "You have succeeded where even experienced interpreters might falter. Your understanding is beyond question." The room shifted. Advisors straightened. Delegates exchanged cautious glances. Recognition replaced doubt. Samira's eyes glistened with unspilled tears. Relief, pride, and quiet joy mingled, visible only to those who looked closely. She had watched her daughter claim the proof she had earned through years of unseen discipline and sacrifice. Omar Karim stepped forward, giving a small, approving nod. Idris, though absent at the moment, had already set the precedent. Respect was earned, not granted. Layla remained composed, aware of every gaze but unshaken. This was not triumph for attention, nor a display of vanity. This was a quiet declaration of competence, discipline, and inherited legacy, impossible to deny. And with opposition transformed into undeniable truth, the next step would be to share the lesson with those who would listen and remember. A smaller audience had gathered, advisors and junior clerks leaning forward slightly, their expressions open, curious, awaiting the words of the child who had turned skepticism into acknowledgement. Layla stood near the polished table, book folded neatly in her hands. She did not raise her voice unnecessarily. She did not gesture with flourish. Her presence alone demanded focus. I have learned, she began softly, measured, each word deliberate, that the value of a person is not determined by the work they perform, nor by the place they are born. It is measured by the care, discipline, and attention they bring to their tasks, no matter how small. Heads nodded. A few pens paused mid-scribble, papers left untouched. The simplicity of the words carried weight, the resonance of truth built over years of quiet observation and learning. Samira stood at the back, hands folded lightly. She allowed her daughter this space fully. No words from her were needed. She was the silent witness of the lesson in action, of endurance rewarded. Layla continued, her voice steady, unwavering. I have seen people overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. I have seen the work of those who go unseen, who labor without recognition. But knowledge, skill, and patience cannot remain hidden forever. They will be seen if nurtured with care. A young clerk whispered to his neighbor, she speaks with the clarity of someone who has lived it. Layla's gaze swept briefly across the room, pausing on each listener, not accusing, not demanding, only illuminating. Respect is not given lightly. It is earned through consistency, honesty, and discipline. And when it is recognized, it changes not just one life, but the lives of all who surround it. No flourish, no applause. The room absorbed the lesson quietly, the impact felt in posture, in lowered murmurs, in the subtle adjustment of demeanor. Samira's eyes glistened. Her daughter had grown beyond needing protection from skepticism, beyond needing anyone to speak on her behalf. Yet she remained present, a calm shadow of unwavering support. Layla closed her book gently, placing it on the table. She inclined her head slightly, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement of those who had listened. A few minutes of quiet passed. The room remained hushed, the lesson sinking in without ceremony or clamor. And in the quiet that followed, the culmination of recognition, diligence, and legacy would be sealed, not with words, but with a shared moment between mother and daughter, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The small home they had returned to felt different somehow. The walls, once plain and tired, seemed lighter in the afternoon sun that streamed through the modest windows. Dust motes danced lazily in the golden light, highlighting corners that had known years of labor and wear. Samira stood in the kitchen, gray blouse replaced by a clean, crisp top gifted through the Sheikh's acknowledgement. She folded away her old janitor's uniform carefully, each crease pressed with reverence. It was not just fabric, it was a symbol of endurance, of years spent unseen, yet unwavering in care. Today, it would rest folded, never to be worn in service again. Layla sat at the small table, the scholarship letter and the symbolic check resting before her. Her fingers traced the edges, careful not to crease them. They were more than paper. They were tangible proof that diligence, skill, and quiet courage could transform a life. Samira approached, placing a hand lightly on her daughter's shoulder. Layla looked up, meeting her mother's gaze. No words were needed. The acknowledgement passed between them silently, of struggle endured, lessons learned, and greatness born from obscurity. They shared a quiet embrace, brief but profound. Samira's eyes glistened, and Layla's small frame carried both strength and humility. Together, they had walked from invisibility to recognition, not through spectacle, not through force, but through discipline, presence, and truth. Layla lifted the scholarship letter and the check slightly, holding them together. We did it, she said softly, not in triumph, but in quiet reflection. Samira nodded. We did. And this is only the beginning. Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a lifetime of hope finally realized. Outside, the sounds of the neighborhood continued, children laughing, merchants calling, the rhythm of daily life. Yet within these walls, time felt paused, sacred. The ordinary had been transformed through extraordinary patience and talent. The mother and daughter shared one last look at the modest furnishings around them, worn chairs, a small bookshelf, the little table where they had planned, studied, and dreamed. All had been witnesses to their perseverance. Layla set the letters down, folded her hands, and simply sat. Samira joined her, close, protective, proud. No applause, No recognition beyond their quiet home was necessary. The moment belonged entirely to them. And in that silence, a truth settled softly. Greatness can rise from the most overlooked places. When it is recognized, it reshapes not just one life, but the world around it. Respect reclaimed through skill, patience, and integrity has the power to lift families, communities, and legacies. Together, they sat, not as maid and daughter, not as janitor and child, but as two witnesses to a life transformed, a quiet triumph that would resonate far beyond the walls of their home. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.